January 26, 1945, Holzwihr, France. Through the frost-streaked window of a German aid station, a soldier from the 2nd Mountain Division watched as medics hauled in the wounded. His unit had gone into battle 250 strong, backed by 6 tanks, and had been stopped cold by one man, one American lieutenant, standing atop a burning tank destroyer, with a single machine gun. When the smoke cleared, only 70 Germans were still able to fight. Those who could talk spoke of nothing else. Not the tanks, not the orders, but the weapon that had shredded their ranks. It wasn't a wonder weapon from Hitler's laboratories. It was no secret marvel of engineering. It was an American .50 caliber Browning M2, a weapon first built in 1933. Simple, brutal, unstoppable. That day, the Browning became the most feared sound on the battlefield, not for its sophistication, but for its merciless effectiveness. The German survivors had just witnessed one of the most legendary one-man stands in American military history. First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, wounded and alone, climbed atop his burning M10 tank destroyer and manned its .50 cal machine gun against a full German infantry company supported by armor. For over an hour, Murphy unleashed hell. His gunfire tore through men, metal, and morale alike until the German attack simply collapsed. When Lieutenant General Alexander Patch pinned the Medal of Honor to Murphy's chest on June 2, 1945, the record showed roughly 50 enemy casualties, but the psychological toll was far greater. German medics soon learned to recognize the handiwork of the .50 caliber round. Hits didn't just wound, they destroyed. A limb strike meant amputation. A torso hit meant death. There was little to be done beyond morphine and prayer. Even soldiers untouched by bullets were scarred. Units under sustained .50 caliber fire broke faster, fought worse, and feared more deeply than those facing rifles or submachine guns. The gun didn't just kill, it unmade courage. The front learned to dread its sound. A deep, thunderous rhythm between 450 and 575 rounds per minute. The M2 could tear through light armor, shatter concrete, and leave nothing human recognizable. Its legend didn't begin at Holzwihr, though. It began 3 years earlier. September 6, 1943, Stuttgart, Germany. The first major daylight raid on the city was underway. Over 300 American B-17 Flying Fortresses thundered toward the target, engines roaring. Veteran Luftwaffe pilots scrambled to intercept, confident in their Focke-Wulfs armed with 20mm cannons. They dove in from above, opening fire at 800 meters. Their shells streaked toward the bombers, and then the sky erupted, not in explosions but in muzzle flashes. Each B-17 bristled with 13 Browning M2s. A formation of 36 bombers meant 468 heavy machine guns. Together, they poured out over 6,000 rounds a minute, a moving fortress of lead. Focke-Wulfs dove in, and then tore away, shuddering from hits. Wings ripped open, engines burst into smoke, and cockpits filled with splinters of glass and blood. The Luftwaffe lost 45 B-17s that day, but their own casualties were far worse. Dozens of irreplaceable veteran pilots were gone, and with them, Germany's air superiority began to crumble. What the Germans didn't yet realize was that they weren't just facing a weapon, they were facing a doctrine. America hadn't built the most elegant gun. It had built the most reliable, the most relentless, and the most psychologically devastating crew-served weapon in modern history. And from that winter in France to the skies over the Reich, one sound came to define American firepower: the thunder of the Browning .50 caliber. The Americans had solved the problem of bomber defense, not with innovation but with sheer firepower. Each B-17G carried between 5,000 and 7,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition, spread across 13 gun positions. Some crews even loaded extra belts, cramming every inch of space with deadly brass. Luftwaffe pilots had been trained to fear the heavy thud of 20mm and 30mm cannons. One direct hit, and a bomber would vanish in fire. But the American .50 didn't explode. It didn't have to. Each round, half an inch wide, 707 grains heavy, moving at 2,900 feet per second with 12,000 foot-pounds of energy, didn't detonate. It simply punched through everything. Wings, engines, fuel tanks, pilots. By October 1943, Luftwaffe aces began to understand the nightmare they were facing. Oberleutnant Heinrich Wurmbach, with 93 victories to his name, described it perfectly in a letter home. To attack the Americans is to fly through a storm of steel. You see one tracer for every 5 rounds. For each one you see, for invisible bullets are passing you. When you close to cannon range, you are already in their killing zone. The Germans tried everything: head-on dives, slashing attacks from above, sweeping in from the sides. Nothing worked for long. The American defensive layout was mathematically perfect. Nose guns and top turrets covered the front. Tail and ball turrets guarded the rear. Waist gunners swept the flanks. Every angle overlapped another. There was no safe approach. In the air, formations of 18 to 21 bombers were arranged like three-dimensional fortresses, combat boxes that maximized fields of fire until the sky itself became a weapon. But what terrified German pilots most wasn't the volume of fire, it was the reliability. Their own MG-131 and 20mm cannons jammed in the freezing air at high altitude. A single malfunction could mean death. But the Browning M2 just kept firing. It spat lead for hours. It shrugged off the cold, the heat, the damage. Even after being struck by cannon fire, it could still function. Barrels glowed red. Mechanics swapped them in minutes, not hours, and the guns roared again without skipping a beat. Luftwaffe pilot Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, who survived numerous intercept missions, said it best during post-war debriefings in 1946. We called them Die Fliegenden Festungen, the flying fortresses. But what made them fortresses wasn't their armor or their discipline. It was those .50 calibers. They never stopped firing, never jammed, never gave us a chance. We lost more pilots to the bombers than to the American fighters. It was like flying into a meat grinder. The ground war told the same story with different names. June 6, 1944, Normandy. Oberst Hans von Luck, commander in the 21st Panzer Division, was a veteran of Africa and the Eastern Front, a recipient of the Knight's Cross, and one of Germany's finest tacticians. Yet even he was stunned by what he faced that day. Everywhere he looked, the Americans had .50 calibers. Mounted on jeeps, trucks, half-tracks, tanks, tank destroyers, even supply convoys bristled with them. The Americans had achieved something no army had before: universal heavy machine gun coverage across their entire force. Von Luck later wrote in his memoir Panzer Commander, "We believed our training and doctrine would overcome American material advantage. At Normandy, I learned the truth. The Americans did not need superior tactics. They had enough ammunition to make mistakes and still win. His troops couldn't move in daylight. Every attempt to shift positions drew instant, overwhelming fire. The sound of the .50 caliber had the same effect on nerves that artillery had on morale: total paralysis. The irony was bitter. The German army had built its doctrine around the machine gun, the MG-34 and later the MG-42, nicknamed Hitler's buzzsaw for its terrifying 1,200-round-per-minute rate of fire. German squads lived and died by their gun teams, carrying 1,800 rounds per weapon. The concept of the Einheitsmaschinengewehr, the general-purpose machine gun, would one day be copied by NATO itself. But Germany had never imagined the scale of what the Americans achieved. A single U.S. armored division rolling through France carried hundreds of .50 caliber guns. Supply convoys used alternating fire patterns, one vehicle firing right, the next left, creating a curtain of bullets that turned every approach into suicide. From the skies over Stuttgart to the hedgerows of Normandy, one truth echoed in every German report: the Americans had built not just a weapon but a wall of steel that never stopped firing. Break up the ambush. Keep firing. By late 1944, American forces had perfected a tactic that German commanders came to dread. They called it reconnaissance by fire, an approach that turned patience into pressure and silence into chaos. Instead of creeping forward and waiting for the enemy to reveal their hand, American columns simply opened up with their .50 calibers. Tree lines, farmhouses, stone walls, hedges. If it looked suspicious, it was riddled with bullets. The goal wasn't accuracy, it was dominance. Each burst either suppressed a hidden position or provoked a fatal mistake. A flash, a movement, a muzzle. The Germans would shoot back and immediately be annihilated. Primary accounts, like Tank Tactics from Normandy to Lorraine by Roman Jeremoix, describe this approach as the soundtrack of American advance. For German infantry, it was madness. Veterans of the Eastern Front thought they had seen everything: Soviet artillery barrages, human wave attacks, tank assaults. But in France, they faced something different: firepower without pause. Captured German squad leaders described the difference during post-war interrogations, now preserved in U.S. Army archives. Against the Russians, we faced waves of men and shells. Against the Americans, we faced fire that never stopped. They fired at everything. They fired at nothing. They fired to make us stay down. They fired to keep us from moving. They fired because they could. After 2 weeks in the bocage, soldiers refused to move during daylight. It wasn't fear, it was mathematics. Movement meant death. And nothing embodied American firepower philosophy better than the M16 multiple-gun motor carriage, a half-track mounting 4.50 caliber Brownings in a powered turret. Originally designed for anti-aircraft defense, it became one of the most devastating ground weapons of the war. Each M16 spat out a combined 2,200 rounds per minute. Troops nicknamed it the meat chopper or the kraut mower. Official reports from the 473rd AAA Battalion in November 1944 confirmed what the Germans already feared. The M16's secondary ground role had become its primary mission. By the Battle of the Bulge, these quad-mounted guns were breaking up entire infantry assaults. Units advancing through fog and snow suddenly found themselves shredded by intersecting streams of tracer fire. The same principle applied to the ground, especially to convoy defense. German doctrine for ambushing supply convoys was precise. Let the lead vehicles pass, destroy the middle trucks to block the road, then eliminate the rest in sequence. It had worked flawlessly against the British and Soviets. Against the Americans, it failed catastrophically. Every convoy was bristling with .50 caliber guns. Jeeps, half-tracks, fuel trucks, even ambulances sometimes carried them. When the ambush began, every gun opened up. The return fire was so overwhelming that German ambush teams often suffered more losses than the convoys they attacked. Captured German officers later explained why their tactics collapsed. Early ambushes used MG-42s and Panzerfaust teams hidden along the roadsides. But American convoys had overlapping fire arcs and near-endless ammunition. The result was slaughter. Soon, German units learned the hard rule of 1944. Never ambush an American convoy. Only attack an isolated vehicle, if you can find one. But isolated targets were rare. The Americans moved in strength deliberately. Each convoy followed a pattern of alternating fire, right-side vehicles firing right, left-side vehicles firing left. This created interlocking fields of fire that covered both flanks simultaneously. Ambushers hiding on one side suddenly found themselves hit from both. Their own cover shredded by bullets powerful enough to punch through stone and timber alike. The psychological toll was staggering. Survivors described it as being inside a cage made of fire. There was no safe direction, no chance to return fire. By late 1944, German forces had abandoned most ambush attempts in sectors where American air power and ground presence dominated. The cost was too high. Behind the relentless gunfire lay something deeper: logistical supremacy. The .50 caliber Browning was not only effective because of its engineering, but because American industry could feed it endlessly. Convoy drivers and assistants were trained on its operation. Ammunition loads exceeded official limits. Commanders were authorized to open fire immediately and overwhelmingly at any suspected threat. German supply columns, by contrast, struggled with fuel shortages, delayed shipments, and rationed ammunition. For the Americans, resupply was a certainty, the rhythm of a machine that never stopped turning. At night, the sight of American tracers arcing across the sky told every German soldier the same truth. What they were facing wasn't just an army. It was the visible proof of an industrial power they could never match. Then came terror from the air. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, affectionately nicknamed the Jug, carried 8 Browning M2s in its wings, 4,400 rounds per minute of combined firepower. Each strafing run from a single fighter could annihilate a column in seconds. Trucks burst open. Tanks erupted in flame. The same gun that shattered ambushes on the ground now ruled the skies. By early 1945, the distinctive rhythm of the .50 caliber, that deep, rolling thunder, had become the soundtrack of defeat for the Wehrmacht. It wasn't a wonder weapon. It wasn't even new. But it was everywhere, and it never stopped firing. They heard the engines first, a low rumble that grew into a scream. Then came the tracers. By the time German soldiers looked up, it was already too late. For P-47 Thunderbolts tore across the sky, barely skimming the treetops. A heartbeat later, 3,200.50 caliber rounds per minute rained down like horizontal lightning. The ground erupted. Stone walls disintegrated. Trees snapped in half. Metal peeled like paper. German survivors called it Stahlregen, a rain of steel. One supply sergeant, captured during the retreat from Normandy, summed it up simply: "You hear the engines first, then everything disappears." By mid-1944, the P-47 had become the terror of the German army. Each Thunderbolt carried 8 Browning M2 machine guns, each gun fed by 425 rounds of half-inch armor-piercing fury. Their missions were called armed reconnaissance, a polite term for hunting. Pilots didn't look for specific targets. They looked for movement. A truck, a convoy, a train, a column of marching men. Anything visible in daylight became fair game. One sortie could devastate half a dozen targets. A pilot might strafe a convoy, climb, spot a tank platoon, dive again, then finish off a crossroads on his way home. German troops adapted the only way they could, by moving at night. But that decision came at a brutal cost. Supplies that should have taken hours to reach the front now took days. Reinforcements arrived late, sometimes not at all. By the summer of '44, the Luftwaffe could no longer contest Allied air power. German soldiers lived under the constant threat of death from above. And the instrument of that terror, the weapon that made the skies lethal, wasn't a bomb or a missile. It was a .50 caliber machine gun. The sheer volume of American firepower reshaped the battlefield. During daylight, German columns risked annihilation by strafing runs. At night, they faced reconnaissance by fire. American patrols sweeping roads with vehicle-mounted Brownings, turning darkness into a trap. The result was paralysis. German units couldn't move, couldn't mass, couldn't fight the way their doctrine demanded. The truth was devastatingly simple. America's heavy machine gun was everywhere, on jeeps, tanks, half-tracks, planes, even boats, and it never stopped firing. A single German infantry battalion might advance into the teeth of 50 or more Browning M2s, all hammering out streams of fire while other weapons were brought to bear. Where German doctrine prized precision and ammunition discipline, the Americans unleashed volume. Suppression was victory. Initiative was survival. And when those two philosophies collided, the math alone decided the outcome. Urban combat made it worse. In the ruined towns of France and the shattered cities of Germany, the Browning became a siege weapon. Its rounds could punch through stone walls, rip through multiple rooms, and turn an entire building into a death trap. Tank commanders learned to use their .50 calories like scythes, sweeping rooftops and upper floors before every advance. The roar of the M2 meant one thing to German defenders: run or die. Panzerfaust teams that tried to ambush tanks rarely lived long enough to fire. To raise your head above a window was suicide. Even thick masonry couldn't save you. The heavy rounds chewed through cover that would stop any normal bullet. Captured German company commanders later described the experience as fighting against thunder. Every attempt to defend, every attempt to hold ground ended the same way, with buildings collapsing and positions shredded by relentless .50 caliber fire. But it wasn't just destruction, it was psychological annihilation. Walls no longer felt safe. Cover no longer existed. Soldiers instinctively hid behind stone, but the bullets followed them, through walls, ceilings, furniture. Each engagement eroded morale a little more. Survive one battle, then another, but always with the same realization. There is nowhere safe from the Browning. In the end, it wasn't a single battle or wonder weapon that broke German resistance in the West. It was the cumulative weight of fire, a relentless mechanical storm of lead from a weapon so widespread and so lethal that it rendered German doctrine meaningless. No strategy, no courage, no training could withstand it. Just the cold mathematics of firepower and the deep, unending thunder of the .50 caliber machine gun. By early 1945, the battlefields of Germany told a single, undeniable truth. American firepower didn't just win engagements, it erased them. German units fought with courage and precision, sometimes even winning brief tactical victories. But courage couldn't stop what came next. The overwhelming, unrelenting weight of American fire. Positions that held firm 1 hour were gone the next, reduced to dust and twisted steel. And at the core of that destructive doctrine stood one weapon, the Browning .50 caliber machine gun. Reliable, ever-present, and mercilessly efficient, it was the beating heart of U.S. firepower. American commanders never worried about rationing .50 cal ammunition. There was always more belts, more barrels, more guns. A single vehicle could bring down walls. A platoon could silence a company. And when the order came to suppress or destroy, the Brownings spoke without hesitation. German tank crews learned a different kind of fear. The .50 couldn't punch through the front armor of a Panther or Tiger, but it could destroy optics, shatter periscopes, cripple side armor, and rip apart any infantry support unlucky enough to follow behind. It didn't need to kill the tank, it only needed to blind it. American M10 tank destroyers, each mounting an M2HB on the turret, became both shield and sword in close combat. When a Panzer team knocked out a tank, they rarely lived long enough to celebrate. Within seconds, the area erupted in a storm of .50 caliber fire, cleanup as American crews grimly called it. Then came the nights. Darkness offered no refuge. The .50 caliber's tracer belts, one glowing round for every 4 invisible, turned battlefields into light shows of lethal geometry. German soldiers could see death coming. Bright streaks cut across the black sky, slow enough to follow with the eye, fast enough to arrive before a man could duck. And they knew. For every tracer they saw, for unseen bullets followed. Veterans learned to look away, to resist the instinct to watch. Replacements couldn't. They stared, transfixed by the glowing arcs until the bursts reached them, and then they were gone. Captured German soldiers later described those nights in chilling detail. You see them shooting even when they cannot see you. They fire at sound, at movement, at nothing. The tracers show where death is coming from, and you cannot escape it. One gun firing 10 seconds sends 50 bullets. You see 10 lights. You know 40 more are already there. And there are not 1 but 10 guns. You cannot survive that by skill or courage. Only by luck. This wasn't accidental. American forces exploited the psychology of light and sound with precision. Reconnaissance by fire meant entire sectors illuminated by crossing tracer streams. Red lines of death stitching through the dark. To German troops, it felt like hell made visible. Even when German machine guns answered back, their fire looked pale by comparison. Their doctrine of ammunition discipline meant fewer tracers, fewer visual cues, fewer chances to adjust. American gunners, by contrast, saw exactly where their rounds landed and corrected instantly. Each burst of tracers acted as both a weapon and a guide. The battlefield itself became a feedback loop of destruction. This visual dominance translated directly into tactical superiority. German soldiers couldn't see where their fire was going. Americans could. Desperate German commanders tried new tactics. Tanks surged forward in mass, hoping to close distance before the .50s could tear them apart. But before they reached effective range, artillery and airstrikes shattered their formations. Infiltration at night, that too failed. The Americans fired at anything that moved or even sounded like it might. Ammunition was endless, and doctrine rewarded aggression. Then came Operation Cobra, July 25, 1944. 3,300 tons of bombs fell on the German lines near St. Lo. But the real killing began after the bombardment. Major General Fritz Bayerlein, commander of the elite Panzer Lehr Division, would later write a detailed post-war account for the U.S. Army Historical Division. His conclusion was damning. It wasn't the bombs that broke his division. It wasn't even the artillery. It was the constant small arms fire, the endless hammering curtain of .50 caliber rounds that made movement impossible. Every American vehicle carried one. Every road, every hedge, every crossroads was under its shadow. Bayerlein realized that the Americans had solved the most ancient problem of war: how to project firepower instantly everywhere without relying on elite training or perfect tactics. The answer was simple: the .50 caliber machine gun. From the beaches of Normandy to the forests of the Ardennes and the ruins of Germany, it was the sound of inevitability. A weapon so widespread, so unstoppable, that it turned courage into statistics and resistance into rubble. When the final battles ended, even German generals admitted it. America hadn't just outnumbered them, it had outgunned them, utterly. April 1945. In the ruins of a collapsing Reich, German officers began putting their thoughts to paper, notes that would later become key to understanding how America fought. Again and again, they returned to one weapon: the Browning .50 caliber machine gun. It wasn't elegant, nor handled by elite troops, but it was everywhere, crewed by farm boys and mechanics turned soldiers, fed by endless belts of ammunition. It set a level of firepower that no amount of German precision could match. The winter of 1944 had brought Germany's last great gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. For a few icy days, it worked. German panzers ripped through the Ardennes, catching the Allies completely off guard. It looked, briefly, as if they might reach the Meuse River and split the Allied armies in two. But then, the tide shifted, not because of grand strategy but because of logistics, and because of the .50 caliber Browning. American convoys roared toward the front, each vehicle bristling with the big guns. Even improvised defensive lines spat out withering .50 cal fire. The snow-covered forests turned into killing grounds where German assaults shattered against walls of lead. At Bastogne, surrounded American troops made the most of their heavy machine guns, cutting down German infantry by the hundreds. The Brownings fired through blizzards, freezing mud, and chaos without fail. German planners had made a fatal assumption: that bad weather would neutralize American firepower. They were half right. The skies did close to Allied planes, but on the ground, the .50s never stopped. The Americans could burn through mountains of ammunition. The Germans simply couldn't comprehend that kind of supply. Among the men who studied these lessons was General Alfred Schlemm, commander of the 1st Parachute Army. By 1945, his troops were starving for equipment and reinforcements. His post-war writings echoed what many German officers admitted privately: that the constant thunder of American heavy machine guns broke more than bodies. It broke morale. Soldiers could identify the distinctive, deep roar of the .50 from miles away. They knew any movement could draw instant, unstoppable fire. Schlemm called it a defensive paralysis, a creeping awareness that every advance would be punished. Even when his army escaped across the Rhine, Schlemm blamed most of his losses not on bombs or tanks, but on the relentless hammering of Browning machine guns during the retreat. Technically, the weapon was simple. The M2 Browning weighed 84 pounds, 128 with its tripod. It could reach targets over a mile away, outranging any German rifle or light machine gun. Its rate of fire was slower than the MG-42's infamous buzzsaw, but what did that matter when Americans could shoot forever and Germans could not? Its ammunition told the story. Armor-piercing, incendiary, tracer. Rounds that could punch through 20 millimeters of armor at 500 meters, tear open fuel tanks, detonate ammo, or turn a truck into a burning wreck. No, it couldn't pierce a Tiger's front plate. But everything else, half-tracks, side armor, artillery, and infantry was fair game. Reliability was its secret weapon. Born from John Browning's genius in 1917, refined through years of war, the M2 was brutally simple and nearly indestructible. Factories across America, AC Sparkplug, Frigidaire, Colt, and dozens more, turned out nearly 2 million of them. The heavy barrel version alone numbered 350,000. If one jammed, another replaced it within hours. German engineers understood the numbers. They had the superb MG-34 and MG-42, the lightning-fast MG-131, even devastating 20 millimeters